If you ever try to meditate and were wondering if you were actually doing anything, this video is for you. The most common reason people give up on mindfulness isn't because it's too hard, it's because they're not sure if it's actually working. They sit down and try to follow their breath, and their mind wanders off 100 times, and they're thinking, what is this that I'm actually doing? And it's a fair question. It's actually one of the most honest questions you can ask. And in this video, I'm going to answer it. Not with philosophy, but with science. Hi, my name is Isha, and I've spent years studying the intersection of the mindfulness practice and yoga. What I'm about to share with you today in this video is some of the most compelling research, modern research in neuroscience. So by the end, you're going to understand not just what the practice is, but how it actually works, what's happening inside of your body and your brain when you consistently practice. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I get asked all the time, does this actually do anything? And I love that question because it means that someone is actually paying attention. It means we're not just swallowing all the wellness marketing that's circulating, but we actually want to know if there's something real underneath the language. And there is. The science of mindfulness has been catching up to the practice for over 40 years now. We have brain imaging, we have blood tests, we have studies done across weeks, months, and even years. And what the research shows us is remarkable. And before we get into these findings, I want to give you the origin story of mindfulness. It's 1979, and molecular biologist at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, John Kabat-Zinn, asked a question that seemed a little bit strange at the time. He had a long time meditation practice and he understood what it did from the inside. And he started wondering what would happen if we took these ancient contemplative practices and stripped them from their religious context, applied them systematically to people who were suffering with chronic pain, anxiety, and other conditions that weren't fully responding to conventional medicine. So he developed an 8-week program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, MBSR, and he started running it with patients at the medical school. And the results were so compelling that he published them. And other scientists started to look at the results and got curious. They tried to replicate them, and the replications mostly held up. And then more scientists got curious, and then bam, there are so many studies after that. And today, in 2026, there are thousands of peer-reviewed studies on mindfulness practice. Thousands. It is one of the most studied psychological interventions in the history of medicine. So when I say there's science behind a mindfulness practice, I'm not talking about a few early promising findings. I'm talking about 45 years of accumulating evidence from some of the best research institutions in the world. Now let's get into what these studies actually say. Here are 5 things that change in your brain and in your body when you practice consistently. Cortisol drops, your cells age slower, your brain actually restructures, your mind gets quieter at the baseline, and your capacity for empathy grows. All of these things that we'll dive into are real, are measurable, and the best of all, they are replicable for you and for anyone who practices mindfulness. The first is cortisol. Cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone. When the brain perceives a threat, whether that is real or even imagined, cortisol gets released into your bloodstream. In short bursts, that's useful. It sharpens your focus, it mobilizes energy, and it helps you to respond to the threat that's in front of you. The problem is what happens when it gets chronically elevated. Chronic cortisol is a low-grade, constant kind that comes from modern life, overwork, and from a mind that just never stops running. It damages the immune system, it disrupts sleep, it increases inflammation, and it accelerates aging. And also, spikes in cortisol levels actually contribute to body fat. And here's what the research shows. Across multiple studies of this 8-week MBSR program, participants show measurable and significant reductions in cortisol levels. This is not self-reported. It's not someone saying, I feel calmer. It's a blood test. It's an actual number on a piece of paper. The second finding is actually really cool. So the mindfulness practice helps your cells to age more slowly. And let me explain what it means because it's actually pretty specific. So inside of every cell in your body, your chromosomes are protected by structures called telomeres. You can think of them as the plastic tips that you find on shoelaces. They protect the ends from fraying out. So every time a cell divides, a telomere slightly shortens. And when they get too short, the cell can no longer divide. So it deteriorates and then eventually dies. This shortening is one of the primary mechanisms of aging at a cellular level. Now, there is an enzyme called telomerase. Its job is to rebuild and protect the telomeres. So higher levels of telomerase activity means that there's better protection of your chromosomes. It means your cells stay functional and viable for longer. Regular meditators show significantly higher telomerase activity. Pause on that for a moment. This practice that requires no equipment, no medication, no special training increases the activity of an enzyme in your body that protects your DNA from aging. It's not a metaphor, it's molecular biology. The third finding is probably the most famous and for good reason. So the brain structure physically changes with a mindfulness practice. This comes from research by Sarah Lazar at the Harvard Medical School, one of the most landmark studies in the entire field. And what she found using MRI brain imaging was that just 8 weeks of mindfulness practice produces measurable changes in the gray matter density in 2 key brain regions. So we'll go ahead and look at them both because it increases one part and decreases the other. So the prefrontal cortex, the region behind your forehead, shows an increase in the gray matter. This is the part of your brain that's responsible for attention, learning, memory, and emotional regulation. It's the part that helps you pause before reacting. It's the part that makes you consider making decisions rather than instantly and compulsively making decisions. So with the mindfulness practice, this part of your brain actually grows, structurally, measurably grows. The second part is the amygdala. This is the brain's primary threat and fear detection center. With the mindfulness practice, this part of your brain decreases in gray matter density. What I'm saying is a part of your brain that drives anxiety, reactivity, and fight or flight responses becomes structurally quieter. These are not functional changes. These are not, participants feeling calm, feeling more emotionally regulated. It's actually changing the architecture of the brain. It's very measurable. Before you think that this requires years of practice, dun dun dun, it just took 8 weeks. Not years, not decades, just 8 weeks. And participants in Lazar's study show measurable changes in their brain. Neurons that fire together, wire together. That is the principle underlying all of this. So repeat experience physically reshapes the brain. And I'm not saying that as a motivational poster, although that'd be nice. I'm saying it from the lens of neuroscience and all the research that has been conducted. So every time that you sit and you practice, every time you notice your mind has wandered and you bring it back into the moment, you are doing a rep. You're firing those circuits, you're building those pathways, you're changing the brain with experience. We get good at what we practice at, and this practice is no different. The fourth finding is about what your brain does when you're not doing anything in particular. There's a network of brain regions called the default mode network, or DMN. It's the system that activates when you're at rest, when you're not focused on a specific task. And its job, broadly speaking, is to generate the mental background noise of your life. The rumination, the replaying of past conversations, and the projection into the future and imagined self. So it's pretty much running constantly, and you probably know what it feels like. It's the voice that talks to you while you're trying to sleep. It's the mind that rewrites conversations you've had from a few days ago. And now here's the thing that's most profound. There was a study done by Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert at Harvard that tracked thousands of people throughout their day, pinging them at random moments and asking, one, what are you currently doing? And two, is your mind on what you're doing? And the answer, nearly half the time, was no. My mind is not on what I'm currently doing. 47% of waking hours, people's minds were actually somewhere else other than what they were doing. So the mind wandering, regardless of if people were thinking thoughts about something pleasant, was constantly associated with lower happiness ratings. Presence makes people happy. Not peak experiences, not achievements, but just actually being here in whatever ordinary moment is happening. And experienced meditators show significantly lower activity in their default mode network, not just that during the practice, but also when they're not practicing. So their baseline is quieter, they ruminate less, and they're more often here than not. The fifth finding might be the one that's most impactful on your daily life. And this is that mindfulness actually grows your capacity for empathy. Research by Richie Davidson at the University of Wisconsin and Tania Singer at the Max Planck Institute found that meditation practice actually increases activity in brain regions associated with empathy, particularly the insula. This is the part of your brain that helps you sense and resonate with the internal states of other people. And so in practical terms, let's review what it means. So first, it means that you become a better listener. You're spending less time inside of your own mental commentary and more time receiving what someone is actually saying to you. It means you're less reactive. You're widening the space between stimulus and response, the one Frankl described. And that space is now more reliably available to you. At the bottom left of this slide, we have becoming more attuned, meaning that you can read rooms better. You notice when someone needs something and you catch what's being said and you're able to read in between the lines. So you're becoming more genuinely present with other people, and which turns out to be, according to research and most people's lived experience, one of the most powerful things you can offer another human being. Now here's what I want you to understand about these 5 findings that we just covered. They don't happen in isolation. They form a loop, a self-reinforcing cycle that actually compounds over time. So less cortisol in the body means less stress, which means you're sleeping better. When you're sleeping better, that means you can better regulate your emotions the next day. And the more regulated emotions that you have means that your prefrontal cortex is actually doing the job. So the pausing and the choosing rather than a stronger, more active prefrontal cortex means more awareness to notice when your mind has wandered and the ability to return. Every return fires these neural pathways, which reshapes the brain further. This reduces your baseline stress. This lowers your cortisol, and then the loop happens again. So it's not a linear conversation with linear results. It's a feedback loop that once initiated begins to reorganize the entire system. That's why people who practice for years often describe the change less as achieving something and more like becoming someone slightly different. The architecture changes and the default settings of the person change. So I want you to come back to the question we started with. Does this actually do anything? The answer is yes. It lowers the stress hormone in your blood. It slows down cellular aging at a chromosomal level. It restructures the physical architecture of your brain. It quiets the noise of the mind that never stops running. And it makes you a more attuned, empathetic, and genuinely present human being. That's what it does. And now there's really only one question left. How much of your life do you want to be present for? The practice doesn't require belief. It doesn't require a cushion or retreat or a particular worldview. Instead, it requires 5 minutes, and it requires the willingness to start sometimes before you're ready. And here's where you start. Right now. Notice your breath without trying to deepen or fix it. Just feel it. The coolness of the air coming in, the warmth of the air leaving. And when the mind wanders, and it will, bring yourself back and start again. And that's it. That's the whole practice. One breath and then another. That's where every long-term meditator in every one of these studies began. One breath and then another. So don't let this moment slip away unnoticed. That's the whole point. Not the science, as extraordinary as it is, not the techniques, just this moment, the one that you're in right now. This is the only place any of this is available. The only place where the breath is, the only place where your life is actually happening. And the practice is stunningly simple. Returning back again and again. Over 1,000 wanderings and 1,000 returns, we learn how to be here